Thank you. So welcome everyone. It's good to see you all. Today we're joined by Amber with NRCS, and she does a ton. She works, she's the Colorado CSP manager, but also the local work group meeting guru. And so she's going to be giving an overview of those meetings, when they need to be completed by, and some helpful tips for conservation districts as they complete those meetings. And so if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll be sure to get to them. And we'll also save some time for questions at the end. And so without further ado, I will hand it over to Amber.
Thank you, Kayla, and I'm glad to be on with you guys all today. Hopefully the weather is great wherever we are in Colorado, and with the upcoming another snowstorm coming in. So if you guys could all shift it down into the southeast corner and the Lamar area, which is home for me, I greatly appreciate it. We've only had about one significant snowstorm this winter. So I'm currently up in Brighton. I'm being a resource team lead, acting detail up here in Brighton and Byers for RT17. Our internet has been awful slow in the Byers office, the Brighton office the couple of last days. So I just wanted to hop on long enough where you guys could put at least a face to the voice talking to you today. And gonna go ahead and kill the audio, or not the audio, the visual, just so that maybe we can save some bandwidth and we don't get froze during the presentation. So give me 1 second to stop the video and share my screen. All right, let me know if you guys can see that PowerPoint come up.
We can see it. You're good.
Perfect. Okay, so some of you may have seen a little bit of this slide deck at the CACD annual meeting a couple months ago. We were running short on time, so I did really rush through the results of 2022. So I wanted to be able to present on it again today. That way it can be recorded and everybody can have access to it. So last year we geared up and really encouraged conservation districts to host local work group meetings. Again, after COVID had kind of subsided within the state and people were able to get together and start having these meetings. So this is a compiled list of the responses and then what we did with those responses as far as NRCS program implementation. So the main question that you might have is, why does NRCS ask conservation districts to host these meetings year after year? And the main purpose, one of the main purposes, is to help determine what our state priority resource concerns are. And so we do have a very long laundry list of resource concerns that fall within the soil, air, water, animal, plant, and energy categories. And out of those major there's subcomponents within those major components, and we listen to the producers on what those resource concerns are within their area. By doing that, we can identify what our priority conservation practices should be. So the state is allowed to choose 10 priority conservation practices based off of those priority resource concerns to be addressed. And those do receive a bit higher incentive cost rate payment for producers if they select to do those within their operation. It also allows us to identify those barriers that we have within the conservation programs on how to go from an application to a contract and then getting those activities on the ground and the different barriers within each one of those points. It also allows us to pinpoint our outreach needs and look to see if there's different avenues we need to be addressing or different ways to find that information out to our producers and our partners. And lastly, it gives us a great idea of what training needs are needed for our NRCS partners and producers so that we can get the conservation on the ground. So last year we did ask all 75 conservation districts to host a meeting. We had 512 individual participants attend these meetings statewide. And this is only either other conservation partners or producers and did not include NRCS staff within that count. So coming back for their first year, I think that is a really great starting point and hope to increase upon it this upcoming year. So one of the first questions on the task worksheet that we had for conservation districts to identify off their meetings is what was their top resource concern for ag land? And this does include cropland, rangeland, and then pasture land, which NRCS defines as like more of your introduced species of grasses that may be irrigated or even fertilized each year is what pasture land is. And so here are our top results tallied from the 512 participants, and no particular order. These were just the top results of what the top resource concerns are across the state. Here is a look at what our top resource concerns are for forestry. And so the big question is, well, what are you guys going to do with NRCS with that information? So one of the big things we did with that information is we looked at our priority resource concerns, which is used greatly within our ranking of our applications, both in EQIP and within CSP. Also within the CSP program, this also looks at the stewardship threshold and if producers are meeting that threshold to be able to continue within the program. So we did have a shift there in the ag land. You can see we substituted out terrestrial habitat for pest pressure in this for fiscal year 23 for implementation of these programs. And then for our non-industrial private forest land, we had a shift based off of our results from concentrated erosion to wind and water erosion. The second question we asked the conservation districts to do is identify those top practices that work really well within the conservation district. So just as an example, there on the left, the top 5 practices that worked really well on non-irrigated cropland. We have 12 conservation districts that came back and said, you know, cover crop works really great within our conservation district. Same thing for rangeland and pasture land. You know, if we look at our pasture land there on the left, again, we can see that 18 conservation districts said that their participants said that prescribed grazing was a really great conservation activity for their district. And then lastly, we had 22 districts come back and say their participants said forest stand improvement was a really great practice for their area. So what are those conclusions that we can draw from that? The first thing we can look at as far as internally at NRCS is we can look to see if we've got enough of our staff trained up and ready to be able to not only plan, but help that participant implement and then later on certify and make payments to those conservation practices that the producers identified work really well within their area. We can also look to ensure that those practices are tying back to our priority resource concern practices, or do we need to make some adjustments within those top 10 that we've selected? Based off of the feedback that we received from these local work groups, we're right in line. So thank you for your participation in helping us figure that piece of the puzzle out. And then lastly, are these practices that are being implemented across the state addressing those priority resource concerns? And again, we were able to answer that as a yes. The third question we asked participants at these local work group meetings was to identify those conservation practices that you've tried, but just does not really work well in your area. Going back as an example on our left with our top non-working practices in non-irrigated, we had 9 conservation districts come back and say, you know, our producers in our area have tried cover crop and we just have not had much success within the cover crops. Same thing for working irrigated practices. You know, it looks like rangeland is one that might not work as well within certain areas of the state. Taking a look at our rangeland and pasture land, we had 7 conservation districts come back and say, you know, participants in our area have really struggled with prescribed grazing. And then lastly, forestry was kind of even across all the ones that were identified. And, you know, they said maybe windbreak renovation in our area in 2 conservation districts has not worked out really well. So again, why did we ask for this? And this is a good place where we can identify what are those barriers to success. You know, is it more of our environmental? Is it because there was drought in that area at that time? Or is it more with just the lack of knowledge coming from NRCS staff to the producers to be able to plan and install those practices? Is there maybe a gap within the producer understanding of what is needed to be able to fully certify and pay on those practices? So based off of that, what training do we need? Does NRCS need to look and review our standards and specifications that go through and each practice to say, you know, what is needed for each thing to be able to certify that practice? Or is there, you know, planning and installation considerations that NRCS needs to look at? Is our in other words, is our staff fully trained to be able to get that conservation on the ground successfully? And lastly, are these practices even applicable to the land uses that they were applied to? So something that we can do internally within NRCS is evaluate if that practice should be even offered within our fund pool rankings and assessments. The next question we asked was if producers were willing to adopt any management practices. So we had seen a large trend that most of the contracts that we are contracting within Colorado are geared more the structural and vegetative. So, you know, if we want to look at like a rangeland example, we might have more of the fences and tanks, more contracts geared towards that than prescribed grazing, which would be the management portion to support those other structural practices within the contract. And so we wanted to take a look to see what is that barrier and see if there's a reason why NRCS is not expressing the benefits of those management practices to our producers. And, you know, some of the benefits here is that, like we talked, it would support the structural and vegetative practices. It can also increase the level of that producer's conservation stewardship. It can help decrease input costs. For NRCS, it is an easier contract management sometimes than those structural practices, but it makes a stronger conservation plan overall if we have those structural and vegetative along with the management. And then lastly, it can increase the producer's resource concern threshold, which does help with eligibility. So take a quick second to think, okay, how many producers do you think implement conservation practices? Do you think a majority is 25 to 50% or greater than 50%? So I'll let you kind of think that out for just a brief second. And results show that right at 25% of the producers that answered this question have completed the management practices. It's closely followed by 21% don't feel like it's needed for their operation, and 20% saying it will take too much time to complete. So something that we want to look at internally with NRCS is that communication barrier of, explaining what a management practice can do for that operation, so that maybe producers are more willing to adopt those management practices. We also asked participants to identify what barriers you have within implementing your conservation programs. And, some of these are environmentally driven that, unfortunately, we can't control the rain as much as we would like to. So, of course, drought is a reason why maybe they have some of those practices not get installed. But there are other places within NRCS that we can take an internal look and get our communication stronger, letting participants know what those program requirements are and those timings. Is there ways that we can shorten the timing for producers and those kinds of things. We also really like to know what kind of new technology is out there so that we can go back to national headquarters and say, hey, let's look at developing some practice scenarios, is what we call them, to allow producers to do this new technology and NRCS be able to help provide that incentive payment for it. And so these are the top responses that came back from our 512 participants, looking at different things, anywhere from virtual fencing with livestock management to biochar and other soil additives within our crop production. So based off of that information, here are some of the action steps that NRCS took to help adopt that new technology. Something I started is a state task work group to look at the virtual fencing scenarios that are going on in trials across the state of Colorado, help gather that information from those conservation districts and producers, and take that information up to national headquarters in order for them to create that new practice scenario and what that may look like. Also, something near and dear to my heart is the CSP enhancements for Colorado. So working with Clint and the programs team, we're looking to develop a state task work group to review the current enhancements we have and see if we can adjust those to fit more of the Western states' needs, or if there's just a new enhancement we need to create altogether. Something for our smaller acre producers, as hydroponics is coming on the docket and available for funding in fiscal years 23 through 24. And then we also have some biochar that has also hit for fiscal year 23. We also asked if you had any other comments that you might want to share about the conservation program delivery. And so we saw a very big push that said, bring the targeted conservation back. And so several years ago, we had asked conservation districts to apply for a targeted project, that would identify like the key area within their conservation district and what those key resource concerns would be and what practices would be needed to address those resource concerns. So what NRCS did is we started a locally led project fund pool. So each resource team across the state now has a pot of money that they can use to look back at the concerns within the local work group and see if there is a place to kind of set that more targeted conservation approach. Also, we saw several deadlines and paperwork is way too cumbersome, and we need to streamline the practice or process. So what NRCS did is we increased the number of fund pools within EQIP, that is the Act Now. What Act Now is it allows NRCS to select certain practices to be offered within that fund pool. And the producer comes in, applies for that. It is a first come, first served basis. And the intent is the producer can come in and apply and then have a contract to implement those conservation activities within the day or within just a couple of days from time of application. Also, we had producers say, please move our sign up deadlines for when to apply for both EQIP and CSP. So we did announce signups earlier within the first quarter, which happened in October and November with a cutoff in 1st of December. And then lastly, we did see some need to have more urban ag and small scale assistance. And so within our CSP and EQIP fund pools, we created one specifically targeted for our small scale and urban ag producers to compete in, not against the larger operations. Other comments is increased needs for more funding to be consistent, which we can do with the Act Now that we've previously talked about. They come in and hopefully within a day or two they have a contract, so that it's helping to meet that need quicker. Also, we saw several producers are saying that what our cost incentive is for doing windbreaks and shelter belts is not close enough to real world cost. And so we made that a priority resource consideration so that it would be at a higher percentage rate. And then lastly, several conservation districts had said that we had seen a large staffing turnover within NRCS within some of the areas of the state. And so Clint and the leadership team are working to identify what accommodations we can make to our staff and partners to keep them in those areas. And then lastly, we asked the conservation districts, is there anything else that you need from NRCS to be able to host these meetings? And we did see earlier notification, getting those out so that hopefully you could host them, during annual meetings. We did have a bit of a slower release time, so we didn't quite get it out as soon as we wanted to, but we did get it out sooner this year than we did last year. So the intent for next year is to try to get it out in early fall. That way, for any districts that have an annual meeting there in the fall, you guys could also work on the local work group as well. We're also going to be asking conservation districts and NRCS to provide success stories this year, based off of any wonderful projects that you in your areas. Sometimes producers are more apt to try some of the new things if they know that it has worked within their area. And then another big thing that we saw was a request to see if we could hold these local work group meetings every 3 years to correspond with your long range plan. But per policy, we are requested by NRCS. The policy dictates that we do need to have these local work group meetings annually. So what is our action items for this next year? Again, is just present these results to y'all so that they are available, and you do know that we are listening to these results as they come in. I am working with our outreach coordinators to help get this stuff out more on our social media or NRCS website page. We also want to provide more training to our resource team leads on how they can help within that local work group meeting. And so one of our big picture idea is, role play one of these local work group meetings, and the RTLs can kind of see what one might look like and just the different scenarios they might go through. And then we did include a guidebook that has more information, such as frequently asked questions, and then also a really good way to step through the targeted approach to help shape what those targeted concerns may look like. And that is the 2022 results. I can open it up for any questions that you guys might have on that while I pull up our next PowerPoint.
All right, thanks, Amber. Any questions while she's working on the next part of the presentation? And I don't see any in the chat, Amber, so I think you're good to go.
All right, so we'll just keep on cruising then and look for local work group meetings for this year. So I found this quote from Hugh Hammond Bennett that says, "I consider soil conservation district movement one of the most important developments in the whole history of agriculture." And I really took that comment from Hugh Hammond Bennett, the founder of NRCS, to just still ring true. If it wasn't for our partners with the conservation districts and you guys just being out there and being our local voice, we would not be able to do what we do in getting agriculture across the state and helping to improve it for our producers within Colorado. So from me to you, thank you for all that you do to help support NRCS and conservation across Colorado. Just kind of, we've already touched on this a little bit, but what is our purpose for having these meetings? And we've talked about, how we adjusted those priority resource concerns in fiscal year 22 and how that's going to help producers when it goes to our rankings and eligibilities within our programs. We can also change what allocations look like. How much money are we going to put towards those state fund pools versus our locally driven ones at the resource team level. We can also create those new fund pools like we did with urban ag this last heard the need in 22 and now have it ready and geared up for 23 for those small producers. And then, the list just goes on, and I'm not going to go through each one of them, but as you can see, hosting these meetings really does help shape program implementation across the state of Colorado for our producers. So getting into kind of the meat of this all, it is on the responsibility of the conservation district to advertise and host a meeting. And the conservation district can feel free to not only invite their producers that they have within their district, but other conservation partners as well. So, you can invite Kayla and Garth to come. You can invite anyone, like your Presence Forever partners, some of those kinds of partners that we work with. We are requesting that these meetings be held by July 15th. And these can be done in any format. So you can hold an in-person meeting, a virtual meeting, or a teleconference based off of the board of directors choosing. And then we also have the local work group task worksheet. So that's where we gather all those results that we previously just went through so that we can evaluate any changes that we need to do. And I am requesting that those be turned into me by July 31st so that I can compile those results prior to us developing what our fiscal year 24 program implementations will look like. So a few things to consider when you're deciding, okay, which platform may be the best way for us to host this meeting. And so if you look at the demographics of your producers within your area, if a majority of them fall 58 to 75 years of age, this generation prefers those face-to-face meetings rather than telephone or email or text. Moving into our Generation X, so if you have several producers within the age of 40 to 57, these producers prefer to communicate by email and cell phone over face-to-face. So maybe a Zoom meeting would be a great way to get in contact with those producers. Entering the force and seeing more of the millennials coming on are age 25 to 39. Again, I prefer email and text over face-to-face. So maybe again, another Zoom meeting or teleconference might be great if you have a large majority of millennials producers in your area. And then lastly, our Generation Z, the newest ones to enter our workforce, age 24 and younger. I think this is interesting that we see a switch that this generation prefers the face-to-face over emails or written other communication. So, maybe having that in-person meeting for this generation would be a great thing to have. So I know this slide is super blurry. I apologize for that, but this is within your packet, just like last year for those who may have helped host last year. So these are all the resource concerns that NRCS looks to address. So this is where we come up with those priority resource concerns based off of our results. And again, they are broken into soil, water, air, plant, animal, and energy, large components, and then we look at the subcomponents as well. So within that packet, there is a detailed summary of what each resource concern is. It describes what it is, why it is important, and how to treat it. And then just a quick glance of, some cause and solution effects, or, cause and effects. So that helps you to really tighten in on what each one of those different resource concerns are based off the previous page. Also, we have a county profile included within the packet. And so this is from the Census of Ag done in 2017. That it's the latest data that we have. They don't have an updated one, but I thought this was a really cool thing to use. You can look to see, what type of producers you have, whether it's, majority of them are in crop production or livestock production, the type of farm use you have within your counties. It also will tell you the age based off of the census to kind of help you gauge, what that majority is and what the best communication style is for those participants to decide what kind of meeting you might want to host. Some other resources that are available that NRCS puts out is the U.S. Drought Monitor. It is hyperlinked here, so when you do get the copy of the slide decks later, you can go in and see what the drought map looks like in your area. That could help drive, some targeted resource concerns and targeted projects in your conservation district. We also have an interactive snow survey map. And so again, it is hyperlinked. And if I was to click on any one of these little blue dots there on the right side of the map, it's going to bring up that snow pack information and potential runoff of these different sites. We have also created an optional survey for conservation districts to use. It is based off of our task worksheet. And so it goes through and asks the producers to identify, what's their land use? Have they ever been involved with NRCS programs before? And then going through what they consider their resource concerns to be. This is optional, and you do not have to use it, but it is a Google base. So for those conservation districts that have a Google account, I can send you the link and then it will automatically tally for you those results. Here is kind of a look at what the local work group task guide looks like. So this is what we'll be asking conservation districts to compile at the conclusion of their meeting, or if they send out those surveys, to include those as well. And we are wanting this by July 31st. And then the last thing we're going to talk about today that is new is that nationally put together task work guide sheets. Again, it's going back to the strong interest to have that locally led conservation projects within the conservation district. There is a really great tool within there to help you kind of go through and identify what that may look like. So strongly recommend taking a look at that. And then here's some more stuff that's within that task guide. It identifies, who could be part of the local work group meetings, what's the responsibility of a local work group meeting, and those frequently asked questions. So again, thank you all for your support in this endeavor. I look forward to seeing our results for this next year and how we can continue to improve conservation and program delivery across the state. And with that, plenty of time left over within our hour for any questions you guys might all have.
Awesome.
I see. Yep. Okay. So I see one within the chat. Nancy has asked, has the packet gone out to conservation districts? The NRCS has got the bulletin with all of the attachments needed to fill out and have support for. They do have access to that. You should have received a letter from the resource team lead from Clint Evans, our state conservationist, encouraging the conservation districts to host them. I know that the platform we have it on for NRCS is not accessible to conservation districts. So I have sent it to Garth and Kayla, and they're going to get all the attachments out after the conclusion of this meeting. And then we are also working with our outreach coordinators and trying to get all this information posted to our Colorado NRCS website as well.
Great. Thank you for that. And thank you for asking, Nancy. That's a good question. I also had one really quick about whether or not conservation districts can host these jointly, or if you prefer to have them separate, and if you could kind of speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, no, yeah, if you've got several conservation districts, I know there's some managers out there that might be managing 2 to 3 different conservation districts. If the board of directors are in agreement with it, yes, feel free to have joint meetings. And then just on that task worksheet, just put at the top, just put what conservation districts were in attendance, and feel free just to turn in the one task worksheet group to cover all of those. But yeah, I've seen it done both ways. I know I've done separate ones where, Northeast Prowers had theirs, and BACA had theirs, and Prowers had theirs. And then right before COVID, we had 2 meetings where we held the Prowers, Northeast Prowers, Bent, and BACA conservation districts all together. And I think that went over really well. Yes, Penny, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just had a quick question for you. Can conservation districts reach out to their local area office to get this information out to the producers they're working with to be able to attend the local work group?
Yeah. So I would work more with like your local NRCS office. prior to going to the area office. They should be able to provide you what you need. If they don't, then yes, please feel free to reach out to your local area offices. So for area 2, which is more of the northeastern corner of Colorado, that would be the area office is located in Greeley. For the western slope, they're kind of spread out all over, but a good majority of them are located in Grand Junction. And then for area 3, which would be the southeast corner, Rocky Ford is where a lot of the area staff is located.
Actually, most of the area offices in Pueblo.
Pueblo, okay.
Okay, other questions for Amber?
And I should say that, you know, the resource team leads, they have all been encouraged to help conservation districts within this endeavor. It is on the conservation districts to be the lead. However, you know, we do want to provide that support, and yeah, so just work with your local resource team lead and helping to develop what the conservation district wants to do and what the support from NRCS may look like.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that.
And I'll just throw out there again this year that I'm happy to help facilitate any of those meetings. I facilitated a number last year, and it was really great to get out and visit with some of the producers. So as my time allows, I'm happy to do that again this year. So just shoot me an email, let me know when you're planning on having your meeting, and if I can make it, I will be happy to help facilitate.
Yes, thank you for that, Garth. Me too. We are here to help with those kind of meetings and just help with those processes. So definitely let me know too in the northeast part of the state. I would love to come and join you. So thanks for that, Garth. Same goes for me. Okay, one last call, and if not, we may wrap up a little bit early. Any other questions? Feel free to kind of just shout them out right now. But as Amber said, we will be sending out the packet materials or the presentations slides that she gave today, and those packet materials too. And if there are any questions, feel free to reach out to Amber. We can provide her email too, if that's okay. And Garth and I can probably help with any questions too. And so with that, we'll wrap up for today. Thank you all for joining us. And hopefully we see you at some of these local work group meetings soon.